Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heidi and this is My Reading Life. Today I'm doing my June wrap-up and I had a very successful month of reading this month. I read 15 books total. 4 of those were nonfiction, 4 were regular fiction, 1 fantasy, 1 YA, 2 romance, 2 graphic novels, and 1 sci-fi novel. So I had a good range of different genres in there, and I had some really great reads in there, and so let's just get right to it. The very first book that I finished in the month was one that I've talked about on this channel before. It's Ship of Destiny, book 3 in the Live Ship Traders trilogy by Robin Hobb. This was a fantastic conclusion to the trilogy. I don't really want to talk about it in depth here because obviously you've got to read books 1 and 2 in order to get and enjoy this book, but I do plan on moving on to the next trilogy. The second book I finished was a non-fiction book on my e-reader called The Worst President, The Story of James Buchanan by author Gary Bullard. Now, I've been working on a project for at least 3 years now where I'm trying to read a biography of every president in order, and so James Buchanan was the next on my list, and the book was not, it was a very slim book. It didn't take me long to read, and the parallels between James Buchanan's presidency and Donald Trump's presidency were kind of astounding, actually. It was really distressing to see how many similarities the two presidents have in common. So if presidential biographies are your thing, I would recommend checking out this one on James Buchanan just to get a chuckle out of the more things change, the more they stay the same. The third book I finished this month was another ebook on my Kindle, and it was Purple Hibiscus by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, which I've also spoken about on this channel. I absolutely loved this fiction book, the story of a young girl in Nigeria who lives with a very religious father who's abusive to his family, and the juxtaposition of that lifestyle with her aunt, who is a more traditional Igbo, has a more traditional Igbo family lifestyle. I just loved it. It was a wonderful book. The fourth book that I finished was a YA, Will Grayson, Will Grayson by John Green and David Leviathan. Told in alternating chapter perspectives by each of the authors. So each author writes a character and those characters have alternating chapters. A fun, frothy, quick read that I would recommend to fans of YA. The next book that I completed was on audio, and it was audiobooks really helped me out my total this month, and I have discovered that I very much prefer to listen to my audiobooks on either 1.25 or 1.5 speed over the norm, just to, sometimes the books, the narrator just is slow paced, and that just really helps me get through those books. So the next book that I finished was an audiobook, which is one of my favorite books of the year. It was The Unseen World by Liz Moore. Definitely a BookTube favorite. I would never have heard of it if it wasn't for BookTube. Also the story of a teenage girl who lives with her dad. Her dad is a scientist studying artificial intelligence and other computer technology type things in the 80s in Boston, in the Boston area. And her dad begins to forget things and how that impacts his daughter's life, and some secrets start to be revealed about his life that his daughter did not know, and she's trying to figure those out. And it just was an excellent read. I loved the Boston setting. I loved the audiobook narrator, had a great Boston accent. The next book I finished was another ebook, and it was The Lawrence Brown Affair by Kat Sebastian. This is a male-male romance that I heard one of the ladies on Book Riot recommend. I believe it was Amanda on the Get Booked podcast as a great example of a Regency era male-male romance, and I loved it. It was great fun. I read it in almost one sitting, so definitely check that out if you like romance novels. The next books I completed was The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. And you've heard me talk before about wanting to reread this classic, which I read for the first time in high school. I know I did not get everything that this book has to offer when I read it the first time. And this book is amazing and disturbing and distressing. And I know I don't have to summarize the plot because we've all heard of it. But definitely, if you have not read it yet, I would highly, highly recommend it, especially in today's political climate. I think it says a lot about things we should be concerned about. The next book I completed was another audio book, and it's called Dark Money: The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right. The author's name is Jane Mayer. This was perhaps one of the most frightening books that I have read ever. And it's not because it's a horror novel, it's because this author, who is an investigative journalist, has over the many years investigated the Koch brothers and their influence on our political system here in the US. And not just the Koch brothers, but other members of that 0.1 of the 1% of the ultra rich in our country. And this book is written from the perspective of how these folks have influenced what we have today for a conservative party or Republican party in this country. But you can see how this type of thing is also happening on the other side, on the left. Big money is definitely, steering the ship here in a very frightening way. This book was written and published just as the 2016 presidential election was getting underway as far as the campaign went. And I would love if the author would write like a little coda or a little afterword that would explain what she thinks about Donald Trump's winning of the presidency in relation to, all of the rest of this book about how these ultra billionaires have influenced our political system. So definitely check that out if that's the type of thing that you're interested in. And I did like it on audiobook. The narrator was very good, and I had no problem following the subject on audio. The only thing I would say is, like any nonfiction, it could get repetitive as the author made her point multiple times throughout the length of the book, which I find with nonfiction happens sometimes. The next book I completed was another ebook on my Kindle, and this one was called 10 Things I Love About You by Julia Quinn. Now, I've had a particularly stressful month at work, and I just needed to get some escapism in, and I have loved Julia Quinn as an author for a long time, and this was one that I had never read before. It was available from my library through the online system, so I downloaded it and read it. It was a fun escapist read, nothing groundbreaking or earth-shattering, but I did enjoy it. The next two books I read were both graphic novels, and the first one was a reread of Bitch Planet by Kelly Sue DeConnick and Valentino Delandro. And sorry, covering up my face there. Maybe you like that better. I had read this book before and really enjoyed the story of non-compliant women getting sent to an off-planet prison system, and sort of the commentary about feminism and gender that this book really brings to light. I think that the style of a graphic novel really fits into the message that the authors are trying to get across. So I was been waiting impatiently for my order of Bitch Planet Volume 2 to arrive in the mail. I had pre-ordered it on Amazon, and they kept pushing back the release date. So it's been 6 months, I think, since I put this on my pre-order list on Amazon. Finally received it, and I wanted to reread the first one and then jump right into the second one, which I did. And in this second one, where the characters that we met in the first volume have gotten sucked into a sort of scheme by the powers that be to run a reality TV program, sort of a sporting event, and they want the women from this prison system to form a team and compete in these reality sporting events. And just a great look at our sort of at issues of gender and feminism in a very compelling and interesting and exciting format. The next book I completed was A Closed and Common Orbit by Becky Chambers. This is a sci-fi novel. It's the sequel to A Long Way from a Small Angry Planet, which I read last year and really enjoyed. This book I also really enjoyed. It, I think, is a slower read. It takes place all in, instead of like the other book was a long space journey kind of thing, and this takes place all on one planet with some flashbacks to one of the characters. You're learning about one of the characters' histories. I don't want to give away too much of the story because I don't want to spoil the first one, and this is the sequel. But if you loved the character-driven nature of the first book, A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, I think you should give this one a try. I know some folks have had issues with it. They found it slow and boring. They didn't really like it, but I did really enjoy it, and I really loved the characters, and it really gave me some food for thought about artificial intelligence. So I definitely would recommend this one. The next book I read was another audiobook, and again, this is another one of my favorites of the year so far. This book I think I first heard about through Simon Savage's channel. It's called My Name is Leon by Kit DeWall. Leon is a young boy, I believe 9 years old when the book opens, living with his mother and his baby brother, and his mom is mentally unstable and unable to cope with life after the birth of her second child. And Leon and his baby brother wind up in the foster care system, and then they're split up. The baby is adopted as he's white and Leon is black, and he is left behind to deal with the fact that he's lost his mother and he's lost his baby brother, and all the things that happen to him. And oh, such a good book. It was awesome on audiobook. Leon is such a great character. His emotional response to everything that's happened to him feels very realistic to me, and it's just heartbreaking to think about kids that are in the system and how, while people are trying to do the right thing, as far as like the social workers and all the adults around, everybody's trying to do the right thing, but here's this little boy, this 9-year-old boy, and like nobody's thinking about him. I mean, they are, but they're not putting his needs first, or what would make sense from his perspective first, and how he's trying to like deal with the fact that nobody seems to understand where he's coming from and what he needs, and take that into account, because everybody's trying to do the right thing for everyone involved, whether it's this baby brother, it's Leon, it's Leon's mom, it's the carers that have to take care of these kids. It's a great book, and everybody that's recommended it on BookTube, I think, was absolutely right. I loved it. The next book I read was another nonfiction. It's one I've been working on for a while, so you probably have seen it before on this channel. It's Field Notes from a Catastrophe, Man, Nature, and Climate Change. This is a series of essays that the author Elizabeth Kolbert has written over the years, investigating different aspects of climate change and where we are today as a society with dealing with climate change. I really enjoy dipping in and out of these science essays, and if it's a subject that interests you, I would definitely recommend you checking out this author. This is the second book I've read by her, and I think she's fantastic at taking a complex subject and getting it into a relatable format that, again, another recommended nonfiction science book if that's something you're into. The last book I finished was another audiobook, and it's called We Are Never Meeting in Real Life by Samantha Irby. I heard Rebecca Shinsky talk about this one on the Book Riot podcast, All the Books, and honestly, this was a okay experience for me. The author is a person of color, and she has physical disabilities, and she writes about the traumas of her life in a humorous way, which all of that was great, but she's a little bit filthy, and I'm not a prude. I mean, obviously I read romance and I read a lot of things, and I would not consider myself a prude, but I just could not with this book at certain points. It really grossed me out. So take that as you will, and maybe perhaps it is something that you won't mind, and check it out if you think it might be something up your alley. It's basically a series of essays as a memoir type thing. And she's humorous. I don't want to mislead you in thinking it's a sob fest. It certainly is not. She is a humorous writer, but it went down some paths that just kind of squicked me out a little bit, and it was just a little bit too much for me. So that's it. That's the books I read in the month of June, and hope that your month of reading in June was also successful, and looking forward to seeing what I can get in under my reading belt in July. Talk to you soon.